Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening on this telephone town hall with Senator John McCain and our special guest, Congressman John Shadegg from the 3rd District here in Arizona. This is a live telephone town hall, a conference call where you can speak live to Senator McCain and Congressman Shadegg, ask them questions, give your comments about what's going on, and to talk directly to your representatives. If you do have a question and want to talk live to Senator McCain or Congressman Shadegg, please press *3. Again, please press *3 if you do have a question, and we'll get you right in the queue. Again, that's *3 to get on the line and ask a question. With that, I'll turn it over to Senator McCain.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank all of you for joining us tonight. We have a lot of things to discuss, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Congressman John Shadegg, the 3rd Congressional District, and an old friend and a great representative of the state of Arizona in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it's been an honor to have the pleasure of working with him on a variety of issues, many of which directly affect our state. I just want to mention a couple of things that have been going on. I went on a trip over the 4th of July to Afghanistan and Iraq, and I'd just like to report that in Iraq we will be leaving. We'll be, by the end of August, down to 50,000 troops and continue down from there. There's still violence in Iraq, and there will be for a long time, but the government does have a hold on the situation, and we can leave with success. As many of you know, their government is gridlocked from a very close election that they had, and it is frustrating that they haven't formed a government yet, but I'm hopeful that they will form a government soon, and it'll be one of the only democracies that have contested elections in the entire Middle East outside of Israel. In Afghanistan, I arrived there the day that General Petraeus took command. It's long and hard and tough in Afghanistan. I believe that we can win, and I believe we've got the greatest general and the finest men and women serving in the military than we've had in our history. The only thing that bothers me, and it bothers me a great deal, is that at the region, they know of the president's announcement that we're leaving in the middle of next year, and that's not enough to succeed, and many of them have decided to just sit back and wait. The president needs to state unequivocally that our withdrawal will be conditions-based. And I'd be glad to talk more about Afghanistan with you and the kinds of challenges that we face that are different from Iraq, but the strategy adjusted to different conditions would be the same, led by one of the greatest generals this nation's ever been blessed with. And finally, on the foreign policy issue, Prime Minister Cameron, the young Prime Minister of England, was in town this week, and because I had known him when he was also in the opposition, we had a private meeting, and the only thing I would mention, besides the fact that he's a very talented, charismatic young man, and that is, they're taking a very entirely different tack in England, and John may want to talk a little bit more about this, to cut spending. They've decided to cut the size of government by some 25% in the next few years, exact opposite from the big spending, continued stimulus, debt practices that this administration and the Democrats are practicing. Very interesting contrast. Finally, as you noticed, the president or Secretary of Homeland Security announced in the Arizona Republic that they were sending some more National Guard to the border and spending some more money, and we're glad of that. But it's not enough, and the situation continues to worsen on the other side of the border. As I say, I think appreciate the measures that are being taken, but it's certainly not keeping up with the violence on the other side of the border. And I'd just like to give you one graphic example. You may have seen it in Juarez, Mexico. A person who was wounded was put in a police uniform and when somebody dialed 911, and as the rescuers and medics came around, and the car bomb was set off. That is a radical departure from previous behavior on the part of the drug cartels, and a very alarming one. But it also emphasizes, again, that we need to get our border secured. We have a 10-point plan to do it. And I also, on my trip, was in Israel, and Israel has secure borders. They have with people and with fences and surveillance. So could I just take a minute and introduce my friend John Shadegg? As many of you know, he has represented Arizona's 3rd Congressional District since 1994. And as an item of historical trivia, John's father, Steve, happened to be the campaign manager of one Barry Goldwater in his run for the presidency of the United States. I just thought I'd throw in that trivia, John. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Senator McCain. I appreciate you throwing in that note of history. It's an honor to be on this telephone town hall with you. You are, in fact, a real American hero and a guy that has fought excessive spending here in Washington your entire career. John McCain was against earmarking and against excessive government spending before being against earmarking, and being against excessive government spending in Washington was cool. He was our party's nominee for president, as you know, and the nation would be in vastly better stead had we had the good judgment and the good sense to elect him as president. I will tell you that as a lifelong conservative who did, in fact, grow up in the shadow of Barry Goldwater, I have never seen in my entire lifetime our nation in greater peril. The truth is that Barack Obama, the leftists who surround him in the White House, and the Democrats in the United States Congress want to move this country and are working diligently and sadly succeeding at moving this country radically to the left. They have done it or are trying to do it on the House side through cap-and-trade legislation, through their extremist takeover of health care, where they've taken decision-making away from your employer, which wasn't a good place to have it, but instead of giving it to you where it should have been, they've given it to the government where it should not be. And they are continuing. The most recent efforts are to take over financial regulation. They have enacted new legislation, which Senator McCain and I have fought to insert federal bureaucrats into literally every level of decision-making in the financial marketplace. That will slow economic growth in our country and will not solve the problems. There is no question about it, but that this administration has a view of the nation, which is that we ought to become a European socialism styled after the countries of Europe. That is not where I think Republicans in Arizona want the nation to go. Indeed, it's not where Republicans across America, or for that matter, where Americans want this nation to go. We were not told during the presidential campaign that is where the Obama administration would take us. Rather, we were told that we would see change. And the change we were told we would see was change in the honesty and the transparency and the lack of corruption and the forthrightness of the federal government. Tragically, that has not happened. I am happy to be on this call in support of Senator McCain. He has fought the good fight for the cause of smaller government and lower taxes, and he stands for re-election this fall, and I encourage you to join me in supporting that effort. I will tell you that, again, there has never been a greater threat, and by dint of his lifelong devotion to the cause of freedom and to conservatism and to limited government, John McCain deserves our support. I'm happy to have answered his request to be in this call. I would correct one thing, Senator. My dad actually managed Barry Goldwater's first campaign for the U.S. Senate in 1952. He ran as re-elect in 1958. Between 1958 and 1964, they had a slight falling out. You have no idea how that goes because you've been able to keep all of your political advisors consistently close and happy forever. And the only thing my dad did in 1964 was to manage the western United States. But it is true that he wrote a number of books about Senator Goldwater, managed his campaigns, wrote his early speeches, and managed the western United States in the presidential campaign. The first time I went to San Francisco was to go to the Cow Palace, where Barry was nominated, and I could regale you and the listeners with stories about that convention. First time I ever came here to Washington, where you and I, Senator, are stuck tonight, was to visit my dad living in the Jefferson Hotel, running the western section of the United States in the presidential race. The nation would have been better off if Barry had won. Fortunately, Ron Reagan built on his success and did win, and we need that kind of leadership again, and we need you back in the United States Senate.
I thank you, John. Brian, we're ready to go with questions.
Excellent. If anybody has, for anybody who's just joined the call and you want to ask a question of Senator McCain, Congressman Shadegg, please press *3. Again, press *3, and we will get you on the line and in line to ask a question. So our first question comes from Grace in Peoria. Grace, you're on live with Senator McCain and Congressman Shadegg.
Oh,
Grace.
Are you listening? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
I said the first politician that got up and said, I'll give you what the country can afford, I'd vote for. I told you the story about my friend that was in our end in the World War II and got engaged. She was telling her husband to be all the things he had to do and give for her, and he stopped her and he said, Shotzi, I'll give you anything I can afford. And when I hear a politician get up and say that, I might vote for him. Are you there?
Well, thank you, Grace. Yes, we're there. And thank you, Grace, for your comment. And you certainly adequately described why there's such a gap between the credibility of Washington and the average citizen. And your words are very wise, and they were as apply in World War II as they do today. And thank you for the call, Grace.
Okay.
Grace, sadly, too many politicians today have no concept of what the people can actually afford. Quite frankly, most of my Democrat colleagues and Senator McCain's Democrat colleagues fear what they can afford is an unlimited amount because they are willing to tax all of the producers in this society and take everything they've got, but they're also willing to tax and borrow from future generations of Americans. And the notion of government being able to afford what it gives to citizens is passé in this town. What we've done is spend ourselves into obscene debt, so much so that the bonding agencies are warning the United States that our bond rating is at jeopardy. And as I said in my opening remarks, one of the guys speaking out against excess spending, before it was even cool to speak out against excess spending, was John McCain. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Grace. Again, if anybody has just joined the call, please press *3, and we'll get you on the line to ask a question of Senator McCain and Congressman Hayworth. Or sorry about that, Congressman Shadegg. Jeez. All right, our next question comes from. Let's see. It is Joyce in Lake Havasu City. Joyce, you're on live.
Yes, Senator McCain, I would like to thank you first for being our senator, and I'm so sorry that you're not our president. I don't think we'd be in the situation we're in if you were president.
Thank you, Joyce.
My question, thank you. My question is, how can we get President Obama to take our border situation more seriously and give us more help? This is an appalling situation along our borders in this country, and the help that he's giving us is obviously not enough, and these lawsuits are ridiculous. How can we get him to take this more seriously and help us more?
Joyce, that's a very important question. I think one of the ways is for us to convince President Obama to come down southern Arizona and to the border area to see for himself. He's never been to the Arizona-Mexico border. I think one of the ways that is for him to come and he would see that we've had to put up signs in the southern part of our state, south of the interstate there, that says, you are in human smuggling and drug smuggling area. Maybe we could have him talk to the police chief in Nogales, Arizona, who told us that the drug cartels have threatened to murder his policemen there in Nogales if they interfere with the smugglers. Maybe he could talk to some of the ranchers and the people there who are afraid to leave their homes at night because of home invasions, drop the kids off at the bus stop. And maybe when he's, on one of his trips out to help Harry Reid, maybe he could stop by a couple hours. John Shadegg and John Kyle and I would be glad to escort him around. And I think he see where we need to complete the fence, where we need better surveillance, and frankly, we don't have enough personnel. I think that might be the best way to try to convince him, but Joyce, I think there's a whole lot, and I'll be glad to listen to John Shadegg, there's a whole lot of politics going on this issue and future elections, and trying to make sure they get the Hispanic vote has got a lot to do with this. So, what do you think, John?
Mm-hmm.
John, John Shadegg, I think the senator answered it exactly right. Sadly, lots of politicians here in Washington do not care about this issue substantively. They, quite frankly, aren't worried about you and I or about the security of the border or about the violence or the destruction we face. They are only interested in exploiting this issue politically. And quite frankly, some of the worst of them simply see it as a political issue where they can achieve political gain, either in appealing to the sympathy of Hispanic Americans who are genuinely loyal to America and torn by the issue, or by trying to get through some kind of legislation that will enable people whose first loyalty isn't to the United States to nonetheless become U.S. citizens, with the goal of having them register and vote in the way they'd like to see them vote. But I think Senator McCain is right. The best way to do this is to try to ask the president to come to Arizona, come to the border, and see what you see what I see what we've seen over the years, and try to make them deal with this issue earnestly as a serious substantive issue that affects the lives of real Americans.
Thank you, Joyce. Thanks for the call. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for calling up tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. We do have a question for everybody who's on the call. If you do want an early ballot to vote early, early voting starts on July 29th. If you do want an early ballot request form, please press 1. Again, press 1 for an early ballot request form, and we'll get you the necessary forms out as soon as possible. Our next question comes from Martin in Phoenix. Martin, you're on live.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. My question is, I have a great concern about how these laws are put together, and I think it was even Pelosi that said, well, let's pass this bill so we can have a chance to read it. My question is, who and how are these laws written that are foisted upon us without having a chance to see them?
Good question, Martin. John, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, let me begin by saying, Martin, your memory is exactly right. Your quote was, I believe, word for word precise. What she said, what Speaker Pelosi said was, we need to pass the health care bill so that we can see what's in it. The tragic situation here in Washington is that there are procedural abuses that go on under which amendments, changes, substantive rewrites take place in the final days, hours, minutes before a bill is voted upon. In some instances, and Senator McCain, I think, will confirm this, lobbyists have a heavy hand in the writing of legislation. And it's not bad to listen to them, but you should not be allowing them to write legislation. But in all too many instances, what happens is you get, in the final hours of trying to draft a bill through, an individual member will make a demand. Mrs. Pelosi, in the current example, will decide that to get that individual member's vote, she has to make a change in the bill, and she will make a change in the bill, and that change will be made literally after every member has seen the bill. It'll be a substantive change, and before we get a chance to vote on it, and we will go to the floor and vote on things that we haven't had the chance to see. It goes to, I think, the heart of what I would call the breaking of faith by President Obama. What he campaigned against was old-time Washington politics, where things like I've just described actually occur, where bills get rewritten at the last minute. Members don't get to see the changes. The public doesn't get to see the changes, and then members are forced to vote up or down on the legislation. He promised, as you will recall in his campaign, change, and the change he promised was to end those kinds of deceptive or deceitful or at least confusing practices. None of that has happened. Under Mrs. Pelosi, we have had a more closed process where fewer amendments were allowed and less time was proffered for members to see bills than at any time in my 16 years in the United States House. On the Senate, on the Senate side, Senator McCain can describe this. I think there's a little better process, but it's an outrage with the kinds of electronic and modern technology that we have today. Every American should be able to see a bill for at least 24 hours and preferably 2 or 3 or 4 days before it gets voted upon. Those kinds of promises are made again and again. They are broken again and again, and bad things get put in, and we discover them after the fact. We're discovering still today hundreds, literally, of things in the health care bill that we did not know when they passed, and the American public simply has to demand that it end.
Well, I can't add very much to what John said, Martin, except that it really does account for these massive bills that, as John said, we don't know all the details of, and the cancer reform bill that was just passed, agreements in the middle of the night when everybody's tired, and it's another 2,000 and some page bill. But that's why people are angry, and that's why they're upset. And I'm sure you are too, Martin. Otherwise, you wouldn't ask the question. And I guarantee you, come this November, we're going to see another kind of change because Americans are sick and tired of this. Thank you for the call, Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. If anybody has just joined the call and you have a question for Senator McCain or Congressman Shadegg, please press *3. Again, press *3, and we will get you in line to ask a question. Our next question comes from Leslie in Phoenix. Leslie, you're on the line live.
Well, hi, John and Congressman Shadegg. Are you running again, Mr. Shadegg?
I am not running again. I'm in this call supporting Senator McCain. I've served my 16 years, and right, you bet.
Okay, John McCain, I've been a fan of yours since I moved to Phoenix in '84. But I have to tell you, I was originally going to ask a question, but you guys have already talked about the border, and that's just terrifying. But my question is are we ever going to get America back again? It's just very hopeless.
Leslie, I keep hearing that question over again, and I believe it. Could I ask you, Leslie, have you been more politically active lately as a result of what you're seeing in Washington?
Absolutely.
That's the point, and I think that's the good news about but the question is that I have never seen more involvement and engagement by average citizens, whether it be tea parties, whether it be town hall meetings, whether it be all kinds of political activities, because like you, they're fed up and they're angry and they're frustrated. And all I can say is elections have consequences, and we're going to get a turnout in this coming November election that will turn things around. I'll tell you one of my worries, and I turn it over to John, but one of my big worries is that we just passed a massive health reform bill and a massive financial reform bill, and now they will spend days and weeks and months writing regulations to implement this legislation. It's awfully hard to turn those regulators around who are unelected, who are writing these regulations and are part of the Obama administration. And that really, I think we can get the majority back, and I believe that we can put a stop to this spending. I think we can do a lot of things, but my worry is what we've already passed. Is that bother you, John?
Oh, there's no question about it. We have moved the country stunningly to the left, and I think Leslie's question is exactly right. And I think many, many Americans, indeed millions of Americans, have exactly that question. Can we ever get the country back? Can we ever return it to the first principles of the Founding Fathers? And I think it's a legitimate question. I am tempted to say it depends upon people like Leslie. You pointed out, Senator, in questioning her, that this is the first time she's been at least as active as she has been. And the reality is, if the American people who understand that this was a nation founded on individual freedom and liberty and the belief that government should only do those things which people cannot do for themselves, and that all people, every single American, will prosper the most if they're allowed to succeed or fail on their own, if those kind of people rise up, and Leslie participates as she is, or as you are tonight in this phone call, Leslie, then I think we get America back. And if we inspire those who care about freedom, care about what the Founding Fathers envisioned, care about having low taxes and less regulation, and reject the notion of creating a European socialist state here in America, then absolutely we'll get it back. But the scary part about Leslie's question is, are there enough Americans who, like her, will engage in this fight? And I just want to thank you, Leslie, for caring enough to be on this call tonight, to hang in there, to push the button, say you wanted to ask a question, and to ask your question, because it is the fundamental question facing our nation, and it goes to what kind of nation we leave our children. Do we leave them a nation that believes in freedom and free markets and individual responsibility, or do we go down kind of that path that too much of the rest of the world has followed toward an all-powerful central government that decides it knows better how to run your life than you do?
Right.
Leslie,
and you know, but there's a lot of Americans that are...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's a lot of Americans that would get more involved if they weren't so afraid. You know, everybody, you know, the Joe the plumber was an example that just scared a lot of people. And I'm, for one, I'm afraid to go out there. I don't know if they're going to pick on me.
Well, the price of not getting involved is too high.
Pardon me?
I said the price of not getting involved is too high. If you believe in freedom, as you clearly do, then you have to get involved, and you have to count on people like Senator McCain, who will be in the United States Senate for the next 6 years, to fight for you and to make sure that you do not pay a personal price.
Exactly. Well, good luck to you all, both of you, and thank you so much.
Thank you for the call, Leslie, and thank you for staying involved. And your question that you ask is the question being asked all over America, and you're extremely articulate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Our next question is going to come from David in Prescott Valley. David, you're on with Senator McCain, Congressman Shadegg.
Yes, Senator, I would like to know, how have you voted on the abortion issue, and how will you vote on the abortion issue in the future? And what are your religious beliefs?
I attend North Phoenix Baptist Church. Pastor Dan Geary is my spiritual advisor. I have a perfect pro-life record, or let me say I've endorsed by the Arizona Right to Life, who makes these kinds of judgment, and I believe in, obviously, protection of the rights of the unborn, and I will continue to do so. And by the way, in this health care bill, this massive Obamacare, as we warn, there is a provision in it that if a state, and you can elaborate a little bit on this, if a state, through a certain mechanism, can provide some funding and federal for certain health care providers, then it's possible that abortions would be paid for by taxpayers' dollars, something that we have prohibited ever since the Hyde Amendment back in the early 1970s, and we warned people that portrayed themselves as pro-life that if they voted for it, that they would be betraying the pro-life principles that they said they stood on, and now it's very clear that we may see the consequences of federal funding being provided, albeit in a roundabout way, but still federal funding being paying for abortions in this country. A terrible turn of events. John, you want to add to that?
I don't think I can add to it, Senator. I believe that the first provisions are already going into effect. I can't remember if it's Ohio or Pennsylvania, where there will, in fact, be, under this legislation, government-funded abortions.
Mr. Senator McCain, will you please run for president again? I voted for you in the last presidential election, and I think you need to run again for president. And don't let your age hold you back, because it sure didn't bother President Reagan how old he was.
Thank you, David. I just am seeking the great honor of continuing to serve the people of Arizona in the United States Senate. But thank you for your kind words, David, and thanks for calling tonight.
Thank you very much.
John, I think you ought to answer this question. I think you ought to agree to run for president again, because we're going to need a candidate against Obama, and you've carried the fight, and I think he's got a great point.
Thank you, John. We're ready, Brian.
All right. If anybody has just joined the call and you want to get on the line and ask a question, please press *3. Again, press *3 to ask a question. Our next caller is Christy in Glendale. Christy, you're on the line live.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance to ask you a question personally. My question's around health care. I really believe that government should not be in the health care business. But the problem is that we have been in the health care business for so long, and I personally know people who use this health care options through the government. They have no other choice. And now the question is, how do we get out of the business, and what is your plan? How do we quit providing health care to people who are already using it?
Well, thank you, Christy. We will continue to provide health care for people. The problem is that we will not dismantle Medicare and Medicaid and the other programs that go to Americans who are in need of it. But I just want to point out the problem with health care in America is not the quality of health care, it's the cost of health care. And with the dramatic escalation in cost, then that makes it less and less affordable, and therefore over time we're less able to care for those who are eligible for these programs. So what we tried to do is, instead of more of a massive takeover, what we tried to do was, with our proposals, was to improve keep the quality of health care and try to bring the cost of health care down. And those were the proposals that we did both in the House and in the Senate, and we failed mainly along line votes. But we're not trying to take health care away from anyone. But we feel that there are examples such as England, European countries, Canada, where health care is basically rationed because they haven't controlled the cost of health care when they are government-run programs. John, you want to add anything?
Sure. Christy, I think it's important to understand the health care debate that we just had. There are Americans who cannot afford to pay for their health care, and there are Americans with pre-existing conditions for whom health care has become excessively expensive, so expensive they can't afford it. You mentioned some of your friends who may already be on government-provided health care. I think Senator McCain is right. For those who are poor and do not have the financial resources to pay for their own health care, Republicans never proposed to take away their health care. And for senior citizens who have reached a point in their life where health care becomes a burden and the government assists them or provides a health care structure for them, nobody is proposing to take that away. But for the vast majority of Americans who are in the middle, the debate was really about how do we control the cost of health care, as Senator McCain said. And one of the problems that I think has led to the runaway cost of health care is that you and I can't make the decisions we need to make about our own health care. In the current structure here in America today, your employer picks your health care plan, your employer, that plan picks your doctor, and you take whatever they give you. Now, that's not true of your auto insurance. It's not true of your homeowner's insurance. It's not true of your life insurance. In every other product you buy in society, you decide what you need, and you go out and buy it, and you exercise kind of market discipline. So you buy what you need. What we proposed, what Republicans proposed, what Senator McCain fought for, was to give the power to select your health care plan and your doctor back to you. Take it away from your employer and give it back to you. What the Obama administration did was to take that power away from you and away from your employer and give it to some government bureaucrat. And Senator McCain is exactly right. What will happen under that is what has happened in England and in the rest of the nations with so-called socialized medicine, and that is they will ration health care, and some government bureaucrat will decide who gets health care and who doesn't. And that is not what we want. But Americans have always generously taken care of the least among us, those who can't afford to pay for their own health care. And the conservative plan, which would have provided tax credits, which quite frankly in his presidential campaign, Senator McCain proposed, would have provided tax credits for those in America who couldn't afford health care, would have given you choice, but also would have provided health care to those Americans who need it, but also given you the choice to make your own decisions. It would have been a better system, a system you could have controlled, not some government bureaucrat. And Senator McCain is deserving of credit for having the courage to lay out to the American people a plan that gave them choice, like they have everywhere else in the marketplace in healthcare. Sadly, the Obama administration won that fight. You asked what can be done. The answer of what can be done is we need to repeal Obamacare, and I know that's what Senator McCain will work to do once he gets reelected to the U.S. Senate. We need to repeal Obamacare, continue to care for those in need, but give you choice back.
Well, how likely is a repeal?
I think a repeal is, in fact, very likely. I think it can be done because this system is so flawed. Just tonight, I learned that the Obamacare legislation has 185 new boards or commissions or government bodies that will decide what kind of health care you get. I think, as Senator McCain has said in this call tonight, the American people are unhappy with the massive increase in government power that has occurred over the last 2 years. I think we re-elect Senator McCain, elect a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate, a Republican majority in the U.S. House, and I believe you can accomplish outright repeal, and then we can enact a reform that empowers you to make the kind of health care decisions that you know how to make for your own life.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you for the call.
Thank you.
looks like we have time for one more question, and that is going to be from Russell in Buckeye. Russell, you're on with Senator McCain and Congressman Shadegg.
Hi, Senator. Here a while back, you made a comment that one of the reasons the Republicans were against extending the unemployment compensation any further was because of some pork that had been added into the bill, and they were filibustering against that. In the process, of course, it probably lost about 17,000 votes in Arizona alone. But I was wondering, what kind of pork was it that you were against?
Well, Russell, they were adding a number of programs on that were unnecessary, but the big reason why we opposed the unemployment extension was it wasn't paid for. We've already amassed a $13 trillion deficit, and at 1.4 trillion just this year, and we want to pay for it, and we wanted to pay for it the unspent stimulus funds, which have turned out to be a total failure, the whole stimulus program, Russell. And we're tired of mortgaging our children's futures. We want to take care of today's workers, but we don't want to destroy the future of tomorrow's workers, and that's our kids and our kids. So we paid for it, and we'll talk the best place to do that was out of the unspent stimulus funds, where they passed the stimulus bill. They said it would be a maximum of 8%. And I'm sure when you look at Arizona, you will see that the stimulus package, which added $1 trillion debt to children's future and grandchildren's future, has not had a much beneficial effect given our unemployment and our situation that we have. Do you want to follow up on that?
I think Russell dropped off.
All right. Can we
for other listeners, I just want to reiterate a couple of quick, two quick points. One, for those not privileged enough to have had the kind of jobs that Senator Kyle and I have had, it is important to understand that the majority controls the bills that come to the floor, and they do exactly what Russell suggested. They take a bill that they think you have to vote for, like an unemployment extension bill, where they view it as, oh, well, anyone compassionate has to vote for this bill. And then they bury in it massive spending on unrelated things that, quite frankly, can't be justified. And they essentially double dare you to vote against it. And I am very proud that the United States Senate Republicans have had the courage to say, look, if you'll put on the floor a straight up and down bill that is paid for, and that's the other issue that Senator McCain talked about. All too often, they could pay for these bills by cutting spending in other places, but the current majority refuses to cut spending in any other area, refuses to, as we in Washington call it, pay for a bill, which simply means cut spending somewhere else, cuts waste somewhere else, and find the money to pay for unemployment benefits, and then we'll consider voting for your bill. But the tragedy is that's not the way the current majority operates. They want to spend us into oblivion, and thank goodness there are some senators who are willing to stand up and say, look, we cannot continue, as John McCain has done, we cannot continue to foist the burden of our current excess spending off onto not just our children, but our grandchildren, and indeed today our great-grandchildren. So I applaud Senator McCain for having the courage to stand up and say, no, we have to draw a line at some point and say this is unjustified. If you'll find the money to in fact fund this bill, we'll vote for it, but since you won't, we're not.
Hey, also, was that our last call to Brian?
Yes, it was. If you guys have,
all right. Could I just wrap it up by saying thanks for listening. We do these teleconference town halls often. I look forward to being back with you again. Again, I want to thank my friend Congressman John Shadegg, who has served with honor and distinction in the 3rd Congressional District of Arizona, and a dear friend. And I want to thank all of you for listening in tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to communicate directly with you. And if you have additional questions, Brian will tell you how you can get those questions to us. If you like this kind of format, please let us know. If you don't like it, also please let us know and tell us how we can improve. I work for you, and I want to communicate with you in whatever means possible in these very, very difficult times. And again, thank you, John Shadegg, and thank all of you for tuning in tonight, and I look forward to another one of these soon.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks to all the callers.
Thank you, Senator McCain, Congressman Shadegg. If anybody does have additional questions, you can contact the campaign by going to our website, johnmccain.com, or giving us a call at 602-604-2010. That's 602-604-2010. Have a great night. Thank you.